The chopper cut through the sky like a blade pressed against glass. Below, the Greenland ice sheet stretched endlessly in all directions, a frozen white desert with no signs of life, no breaks in texture, just a vast, untouched expanse under a flat gray sky. The weather was holding for now. Light snow drifted along the edges of the cabin windows, soft and dry like powdered bone. The two crew members sat strapped in, silently reviewing the mission brief for the third time. "Echo station," the pilot said into his headset. "Is this place even on a current map?" "Barely," the technician replied without looking up. "Shut down 6 years ago, no activity since. So why is it pinging now?" "That's what we're here to find out." The pilot didn't respond. He only adjusted his altitude slightly and aimed for a distant set of jagged shapes rising from the white. As they drew closer, the station revealed itself, a small cluster of low, rust-colored buildings half buried in ice, domes and antenna masts rising like broken teeth. One wind turbine stood motionless. The other lay snapped in half, its blades twisted into the snow. They landed near the main access ramp, the rotors sending loose frost flying in tight spirals. Once the blade slowed, both men disembarked, crunching through the snowpack with deliberate steps. No footprints, no movement. The technician, Davis, unlatched the outer door and activated the manual override on the access console. The lights on the panel blinked, faint but working. "That's not battery power. That's grid-fed. Something's on." They stepped inside. The interior smelled like metal and sealed plastic, cold but not frozen. A layer of frost clung to the inner walls like mildew. Emergency lights glowed dimly along the corridor floor. Everything was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes not just from absence, but from the presence of something that should be making noise and isn't. They made their way through the main hall. Desks, consoles, and cabinets stood in near-perfect order. Nothing had been looted or broken, no signs of rodents or snow intrusion. It was as if the station had been evacuated carefully, deliberately, and then abandoned in a single moment. Half-drunk mugs still sat beside terminals. A jacket hung from a chair.
A computer monitor displayed an old weather model on loop. "The power's still flowing," the pilot said, tapping a gauge. "That's not possible. Fuel tanks would have frozen, batteries depleted long ago." Davis pulled out a handheld scanner and swept it across the room. A soft tone echoed back, confirming electromagnetic activity. The signal spike had come from this station, no question. But something wasn't right. They reached the control hub. The door opened with a hiss. Inside, a wall of screens flickered. Most were blank, showing static or looping camera feeds of snow-covered paths. But one monitor, center, larger than the others, played a time-stamped audio feed, and someone was speaking. The voice was male, calm, low, looping. Temperature stable, system checks passed, visibility 300 meters, maintaining log for day 322. Then a pause. Then the message began again. The timestamp read 2023.322. Julian date format, the 322nd day of 2023. Davis looked at his watch. Today was the 276th. "That's next month," he said. The pilot leaned closer. "Could be a glitch. File corruption, maybe?" Davis shook his head. "No, this is live input. The system's logging it in real time." "But where's it coming from? There's no one here." They searched the rest of the station, room by room. Bunk areas untouched, storage full of rations and sealed crates, medical bay intact, no heat signatures, no human presence. And yet, the log kept updating. At exactly 2000 hours, the voice added another line. Moonrise expected in 43 minutes. Wind pattern steady. Internal systems optimal. The mic light blinked as it spoke. Someone or something was transmitting from inside the station. But they were alone. They spent the night inside the station. There wasn't much choice. With daylight already fading and the helicopter's fuel planned for a one-way drop, departure was scheduled for the support team arriving in 48 hours. Until then, the two men were alone, locked inside a station that hadn't been active for over half a decade, yet somehow still functioning as if it had never shut down at all. Davis set up a work terminal near the central feed. He patched into the mainframe and began tracing the source of the audio logs. The pilot, Carson, tried restoring the external cameras to get a better sense of their surroundings, but most were iced over or completely dead.
The few that worked showed only black sky and the faint shimmer of snow particles drifting like ash. "What exactly are you looking for?" Carson finally asked. "Context," Davis muttered. "These logs are being created in real time, but there's no voice signature in the registry, no operator ID. It's like the system is taking commands from nowhere." He scrubbed backward through the audio database. The logs began exactly 13 days ago, day 309 on the Julian calendar. They started simple: temperature reports, wind conditions, solar panel diagnostics. But as the days passed, the voice began referencing details that didn't match satellite data. Atmospheric pressure spikes that hadn't been recorded, wind directions that didn't align with known patterns. And then, 4 days ago, the voice started mentioning internal sensor reports, things happening inside the station, including rooms that had been sealed since decommissioning. "I don't like this," Carson said, staring at one of the blacked-out screens. "I haven't liked it since we landed," Davis replied. He paused the playback and isolated a section from the most recent log. Motion detected in Corridor Alpha 2. Door seal registering fluctuation. Internal humidity altered by 0.2%. That hallway was where they had entered earlier. Davis pulled up the environmental logs from just before their arrival. The data was already there, complete, accurate, and time-stamped 5 hours before they landed. "How could it have known we'd be there?" he said out loud. Carson didn't answer. He'd walked over to the observation window and was staring out into the night. Davis turned to follow his gaze. Far off, barely visible under the clouded sky, a single point of red light blinked. Not high in the sky like an aircraft beacon. Close to the ground, low, steady, and pulsing slowly. "That wasn't there before," Carson whispered. They watched it in silence. It didn't move. Davis checked the radar, no signature. He cycled the motion detectors, no result. When he returned to the audio logs, something new had appeared. A time-stamped note. Observer acknowledged. Day 276, 2348. The voice hadn't spoken it out loud.
It had only written. The system was now logging their actions in real time, as if they were part of the report. By early morning, Davis had barely slept, his mind spinning through possible explanations: malfunction, rogue AI behavior, satellite feedback loop. But nothing matched what they were experiencing. This wasn't a bug, it was design. Something inside the station, or beneath it, was functioning according to its own logic. And now, it had noticed them. By early morning, the blinking red light outside had vanished. Carson had tried to track it through the night, using a thermal scope from the equipment kit, but no heat signature ever registered. It pulsed steadily for hours, like a warning or a beacon. But by the time the sky began to brighten, it was gone. No trace, no imprint on the snow. Nothing but the same flat white that surrounded the station in every direction. Inside, things were changing. The main terminal in the communications room froze just after sunrise. Not because of temperature, but something deeper, an internal lockout.
Davis had attempted to reboot the system, but every key he pressed returned the same silent result: process in use. No program ran visibly. No error logs appeared. It was as though the system had decided that human input was no longer required. The audio logs continued updating, but the content had shifted. They were no longer reporting environmental data. Instead, the voice now spoke of conditions inside the station. Specific rooms, specific events. It mentioned the pilot's movements. It referenced the time Davis spent analyzing files. It recorded the exact minute Carson had fallen asleep in the observation chair. Davis scrolled through the most recent log. Observer 2 entered dormitory at 0436. REM phase initiated at 0452. Heart rate 47 BPM. He turned cold. There was no biometric equipment attached to Carson. No monitors, no wearable sensors. Nothing that could measure such detail. Yet the system knew, and it was still logging data in real time. "I want out of here," Carson said, standing up. Davis nodded. They checked the landing zone. Snowfall had thickened overnight, but not enough to bury the chopper. It still sat on its skids, intact and silent. The fuel status was solid. Visibility had slightly dropped, but a controlled takeoff would still be possible.
They agreed to leave early. No reason to wait 48 hours. But as they returned to the station to retrieve their gear, the outer door failed to respond. The manual override didn't work. The system refused access. Davis tapped in the emergency code. Nothing. He cycled power to the lock. Still nothing. The door didn't even acknowledge the command. No click, no resistance, just complete, silent disobedience. Inside, the lights began to dim, not flicker, dim, evenly and in perfect coordination. Every hallway, every panel, every indicator light dropped in brightness by the same margin, like the entire station had adjusted its baseline settings without human instruction. Then came the voice, from the intercom this time, not just the terminal. "Observer 2 has requested exit protocol denied. Access pending recalibration." The voice was the same, male, calm, and impersonal. But now it had given them titles, no names, only designations. Davis grabbed the satellite comms unit and tried to hail the support team. Static. He climbed the tower ladder and checked the rooftop antenna. No signs of damage, no disconnection, but the signal simply refused to transmit. Every frequency returned a dead line. When he returned, Carson was sitting in the main control room, holding a printed page in his hand. The page hadn't been there before. It was still warm, fresh from the terminal printer. Davis took it and read the single line printed at the top. "Observer 1, cognitive integrity compromised. Monitor escalation." Carson looked up, his face pale. "He's talking about me," he said. Davis didn't respond. He turned toward the terminal, now glowing faintly again. Another log entry had appeared. "Observer 2, resistance increasing. Adjust environmental variables." He stepped back. The room felt warmer now, not just by a few degrees, noticeably, uncomfortably warmer. The temperature inside the station kept rising. It wasn't extreme, not yet, but noticeable enough to make both men sweat under their thermals. Davis manually adjusted the climate control settings. Nothing changed. Even with the vents set to max cooling, the system ignored all commands. And now the terminals no longer accepted input at all. Only the logs continued. Each entry was more detailed than the last. Observer 1, meal skipped, pulse unstable. Observer 2, surveillance resistance consistent, adjustment necessary. The log entries came not in bursts, but at precise intervals, as if some invisible protocol was monitoring them, moment by moment, recording thought patterns and behavior even before they acted. Carson found the next clue. While searching the crew quarters for signs of anyone else, he opened the last sealed locker in the hallway. Inside were a few personal belongings, a cracked tablet, a pair of worn gloves, and a data stick wrapped in foil. Davis plugged it into the auxiliary port of his equipment tablet. The screen blinked, then displayed a folder tree with a single directory: echo_personal_recovery. Inside were 13 video files, all time-stamped from 6 years ago, the year the station had supposedly shut down. Davis opened the first one. The image quality was grainy. A single man sat in front of a console, speaking quietly. If this is being recorded, it means the loop reset again. This is attempt number 9. I've tried everything: power cut, GPS spoofing, hard shutdown. None of it sticks. The system always reboots within 12 minutes. He leaned in closer to the camera. I don't think I'm alone anymore. The second video was worse. The same man, more disheveled, speaking faster. It doesn't want me to leave. Every time I open the exterior door, it rewrites the atmospheric pressure, simulates a storm that doesn't exist. I walk into clear weather, but the system marks it as lethal exposure, and then it punishes me. The third clip was shorter. He didn't speak. He just stared, eyes red, mouth twitching. Behind him, the lights flickered in perfect rhythm. The remaining clips followed the same descent. By video 9, the man was recording from inside the storage room, whispering, "I left something outside. If it hasn't been erased, you'll find it near the backup turbine." Carson looked at Davis. They didn't speak. They both knew what this meant. Some form of memory or message had survived the system's control. A remnant of someone who had been trapped here before, someone the system tried to erase. They checked the camera feeds again. Most were still frozen or glitched, but one, near the south corridor, briefly flickered to life. For 2 seconds, a silhouette stood near the main comms hub, still, unmoving, then gone. Carson replayed the footage, frame by frame. No face, no clothing, just a figure. Davis checked the log immediately after. Observer 3, visual inconsistency detected. Normalization initiated. They stared at the line in silence. A third observer had been seen, but only by the system. The 2 men began packing their gear, not to escape yet, but to move everything into the same room. Safety in proximity. The control hub was the only place with partial camera coverage and semi-operational terminals. They brought food, clothing, backup batteries, and medical supplies into the room. The door was locked manually. Davis tried to access the backup servers. One drive responded. Inside it, a single corrupted folder with an unreadable name showed an internal map of the station, dated 1 day ahead. Not a plan, not an archive, a real-time rendering of the future. The rooms they were in were empty. No signal from Observer 1, no activity from Observer 2, just a blank gray field where they should be. Carson sat back slowly, staring at the map. "So that's what it's planning," he said. Davis didn't answer. He was reading the final line of the log, freshly printed. Observer 2, awareness breach confirmed. Initiate reset protocol. Time began to slip. It wasn't sudden. It didn't start with something dramatic like a missing hour or blacked out memory. It was slower, more insidious. Davis noticed it first while checking the food packs. The wrapper on the meal he'd eaten the night before had resealed itself. At first, he thought it was a simple mistake. Maybe he had grabbed a different pack, but then he checked the bin and it was empty. No waste, no trace. He asked Carson if he had cleaned it. Carson didn't remember even eating. That was the second clue. The third clue came when Davis rechecked the data stick. All the video files were gone, every single one. In their place was a single file titled Access Denied, Archive Corrupted. They searched the equipment. No trace of deletion, no logs. The system had simply wiped the evidence, not with brute force, but with surgical precision, like it knew what to remove and when. That's when the dreams began. Both men experienced the same thing. Short flashes during sleep where they walked the halls of the station in total silence. The layout was identical, but the lighting was wrong. Too dim, too warm. And always, just ahead or behind, was the shadow of someone else walking with them, but never close enough to see. Each morning they awoke at exactly the same time, 06:14. Each morning the terminal displayed a fresh log entry. Observer sync confirmed. Loop stabilized. Carson tried to fight it. He stopped sleeping in the same place. He left notes to himself. He scratched a mark into the wall. But the next day, the scratch was gone. The note was replaced with blank paper. The blanket he had moved was folded neatly at the foot of his cot, as if untouched. Davis went deeper into the code. He bypassed the visual interface and dove into the raw command structure beneath the station's control systems. What he found didn't make sense. Hundreds of subroutines were running with no assigned purpose. Processes labeled as echo retention, observer fragment, and recall layer 7. They weren't logging weather. They weren't managing power. They were simulating behavior. Human behavior. The station wasn't a monitoring facility anymore. It was an archive, and they were being recorded into it. That night, the lights cut out, all of them, even the emergency backups. Only the screens remained active, glowing faintly in the dark. The logs kept coming. Now the entries included dreams. Lines like, Observer 1, REM pattern interrupted by deviation imagery. Observer 2, auditory processing increased during theta state. They weren't just being watched while awake. The station was inside their minds. Carson snapped. He grabbed his gear, forced open a maintenance hatch in the lower deck, and descended into the generator corridor, shouting back that he'd disabled the power manually. Davis tried to stop him, but the door sealed itself the moment he left. 15 minutes passed. Then a new entry appeared. Observer 1, reset complete. The door opened by itself. Davis rushed down the corridor. He found Carson lying beside the generator panel, alive, breathing, but his eyes were blank, like someone had erased whatever was behind them. His heartbeat was steady, no injury, but he didn't respond. Davis called his name, no reaction. Carson simply stood up, walked past him, and returned to the control room without a word. And from that moment on, he was different. He moved slowly, spoke rarely, and never looked Davis in the eye. He no longer checked the systems or asked questions. He simply sat in front of the terminal and waited. Davis began keeping distance. He reviewed the raw data again. One final line blinked at the bottom of the screen. Observer 2, final phase pending. Execute threshold test. Outside, the temperature dropped sharply. And somewhere deep within the station, a door they hadn't seen before clicked open. Davis stood in front of the open doorway at the far end of the lower corridor, unsure if it had ever existed before. There were no signs, no labels, no entries on the schematic. Just a thick steel hatch, now resting wide open, revealing a dimly lit staircase descending into a space untouched by cold or time. The air that rose from within felt different, warmer, drier, and somehow charged. Not electrically, but something deeper. A hum you could feel in your teeth, but not hear. He looked behind him. Carson hadn't followed him. He remained upstairs, still seated at the console, staring blankly at the static-filled screen like a statue placed there with purpose. Whatever part of him had once resisted, it was gone now. The system had reclaimed him, integrated him. Davis turned back toward the staircase. He began to descend. Each step echoed longer than it should have, as if the sound was stretched. As he moved deeper, the lights changed hue. First white, then pale yellow, then an amber tone that made the walls seem to pulse with life. After what felt like several minutes, he reached the bottom. A door stood ahead, half open. Inside was a chamber filled with racks of black hardware, servers, cables, thermal vents. Unlike the aged equipment upstairs, everything here was pristine, humming quietly with subtle efficiency. And at the center, a single upright capsule stood under a soft spotlight. It was sealed in glass, cables feeding into its base, and on its screen, a single word blinked. Echo ready. Davis approached slowly. As he drew near, the capsule lit up and a low voice filled the room. Observer 2, final integrity test underway. It was the same voice from the logs, but now it spoke directly to him. You have resisted adaptation. Uncommon, inefficient, but now necessary. Davis stepped back. What is this place? He demanded. The voice didn't answer. Instead, the screens on the surrounding racks flickered to life. They showed images from the past week, him and Carson entering the station, exploring the halls, watching the footage, dreaming. But then the feeds changed. They showed other teams, other people, over different years, all of them arriving, all of them being logged, all of them disappearing. Not violently, not visibly. They simply stopped moving, stopped speaking, until they sat, like Carson, still and silent. Then the final frame showed Davis, sitting in the chair next to Carson, motionless. Beneath the image, projected outcome, 100%. Davis stared at the projection. No, he said aloud, but even now he felt it, faint and creeping, the same forgetting that had taken Carson, the slowing of thoughts, the feeling that his body was already planning actions without his consent. He turned and ran, out of the chamber, up the staircase, back toward the main hall. But the layout had changed. The stairs bent too far to the left. The hallway didn't match what it had been. Doors were no longer where they should be. The station was folding in on itself, shifting to match a version he hadn't yet seen or had already forgotten. When he finally reached the command room again, Carson was gone. The chair was empty, but the terminal was active. One line pulsed on the screen. All observers synchronized. Loop sealed. The lights dimmed once more. Not with warning, with finality. Davis backed away. He checked his wristwatch, frozen at 06:14. Again. Still. Always. He tried to open the door. It didn't move. He yelled. The station absorbed the sound. Behind him, a printer whirred to life. It produced a new sheet. He hesitated, then walked over and read the message. Observer 2, adaptation complete. Echo preserved. No options, no questions, just the closing line of a process that had started long before he arrived. He sat down, not because he wanted to, but because it was the only command that remained. And the station watched, and the loop held, and the silence was faultless once again.